The emergency sirens wailed across every human colony as the message arrived simultaneously on 1,000 worlds. 3 days. That was all the time the Vortic Empire had given humanity to surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. The alien armada floating at the edge of human space consisted of over 3,000 warships, each one capable of turning an entire planet into molten slag. Ambassador David Reed sat in the emergency session of the Galactic Council, surrounded by representatives from dozens of alien species. The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every delegate knew what this meant. The Vortic Empire had never been defeated in battle, and their fleet was the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. General Thane, the Vortic military commander, stood at the center of the chamber with his arms crossed. His reptilian features showed nothing but contempt as he looked at the human ambassador. "Your species has 48 hours remaining," he said, his voice echoing through the vast hall. "Submit to Vortic rule or watch your worlds burn." The other council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Zephyrians, humanity's closest allies, looked genuinely concerned. Even the proud Altarians, who had fought the Vortic too, a standstill centuries ago, appeared nervous. Everyone knew the mathematics of the situation. Humanity had fewer than 200 ships in their entire fleet, and most of those were exploration vessels converted for basic defense. "We understand your position, General," David replied calmly, standing to address the chamber. "However, humanity must respectfully decline your generous offer." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The Vortic general's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You would choose extinction over submission?" "We choose freedom over tyranny," David answered without hesitation. "And we will defend that freedom." General Thane's laughter boomed through the chamber, joined by nervous chuckles from several other delegates. "With what? Your entire fleet could not defeat a single Vortic battle group. You face 3,000 ships with less than 200. "Actually," David said, checking his communication device, "we will be sending one ship." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the translator system seemed to pause, as if unable to process what they had heard. General Thane's laughter died in his throat, replaced by a look of complete bewilderment. "One ship?" he repeated slowly. "You mean one battle group?" "No, General, one ship." The silence stretched for several long moments before chaos erupted. Delegates from every species began talking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of disbelief and confusion. The Zephyrian ambassador leaned forward, his concern evident. "David, surely you cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," David replied, his voice cutting through the noise. "Humanity will send one ship to resolve this matter. General Thanes." Confusion transformed into rage. "You mock us." No single vessel could stand against the might of the Vortic Empire. "Perhaps not," David agreed. "But this is not just any vessel." The human ambassador began walking toward the exit, his steps echoing in the now quiet chamber. As he reached the door, he turned back to address the assembled delegates one final time. "You have made the same mistake that many others have made, General. You assume that humanity fights the way you fight. You assume that we think the way you think. You assume that we approach problems the way you approach problems. What are you talking about?" General Thane demanded. "You see 3,000 ships and assume that overwhelming force is the only solution. You see our small fleet and assume we are defenseless. You see one ship and assume we are insane." David smiled coldly. "You are wrong on all counts." The ambassador activated his communicator, speaking clearly so everyone in the chamber could hear. "This is Reed. Operation Endgame is authorized. Tell Rogers to prepare for deployment." As David left the chamber, General Thane called after him. "Your one ship will be destroyed in seconds? Your world will burn, maybe," David replied without turning around. "But I would not be so certain if I were you." The doors closed behind the human ambassador, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The other delegates looked at each other with confusion and concern. The Zephyrian ambassador shook his head sadly. "The humans have chosen suicide over surrender." "But The Altarian representative, older and more experienced than most, was not so sure. In all my years of observation, I have never seen humans make a decision without careful consideration. They are not a species prone to suicidal gestures. What are you suggesting? Asked the Centauran delegate. I'm suggesting that perhaps we do not know as much about humanity as we think we do. Meanwhile, in the depths of space near the lunar orbital facilities, something was stirring. The most classified project in human history was finally being activated. For 20 years, the best minds of humanity had worked in absolute secrecy on a single vessel. They had taken every lesson learned from first contact, every piece of alien technology they could study, and every innovation their species could conceive. The result was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not the largest ship ever built, nor the most heavily armed. It was not the fastest or the most advanced in conventional terms. But it was something else entirely. It was everything humanity had learned about survival, adaptation, and the refusal to give up, condensed into a single vessel. The ship had no official name in the fleet records. The engineers who built it called it the Phoenix, after the mythical bird that rose from its own ashes. Soon, the galaxy would understand why that name was so appropriate. In the Vortok fleet, General Thane was already making preparations for the destruction of Earth. He had divided his armada into 3 groups, each one more than capable of overwhelming any human defense. The first group would eliminate the single human ship, whatever it might be. The second would bombard the orbital defenses. The third would reduce the planet's surface to rubble. Sir, his aide reported, our scouts detect no movement from the human fleet. They appear to be maintaining defensive positions around their major colonies. Cowards, Thane muttered. They send one ship to die while the rest hide behind their planets. What General Thane did not understand was that every human ship was exactly where it needed to be. The defense of Earth did not depend on the fleet. It depended on a single vessel and the revolutionary technology it carried. More importantly, it depended on the people who crewed it and the philosophy they represented. The countdown continued, marking the hours until the Vortic ultimatum expired. But in the depths of space, humanity was ready. They had learned long ago that survival was not about being the strongest or the most numerous. It was about being the most adaptable, the most determined, and the most willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. But first, it would learn that humanity had never been the immovable object in that equation. The hyperspace rupture appeared without warning at the edge of the contested sector, sending ripples of distorted spacetime across the Vortok fleet's sensors. What emerged from the tier in reality was unlike anything in their extensive military databases. The human vessel was massive by the standards of their small fleet, but still appeared insignificant compared to the smallest Vortok destroyer, Admiral. Voss studied the readings from his flagship's command center with growing confusion. The human ship's energy signature was completely unlike anything they had encountered before. Standard sensors could barely penetrate its hull, and the vessel's mass readings fluctuated in ways that defied conventional physics. Analysis report, he commanded his science officer, a tall alien with multiple eyes arranged around his elongated skull. Sir, the human vessel appears to be approximately 8 kilometers in length and 2 kilometers in width. However, our sensors are having difficulty penetrating its hull composition. The materials appear to be absorbing our scanning beams. Admiral Voss nodded grimly. The humans had clearly invested considerable resources in stealth technology. It was a clever move, but ultimately pointless against such overwhelming numerical superiority. Weapon status? All battle groups report ready for engagement, sir. We have the human vessel completely surrounded. The human ship, designated Phoenix according to the identification signal it was broadcasting, moved with surprising grace for something so large. It positioned itself directly between the Vortok Armada and the distant blue-green world that was the human homeworld. The symbolism was not lost on Admiral Voss. The humans intended to make their final stand here, alone in the darkness of space. Sir, The communications officer reported, "We are receiving a transmission from the human vessel." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of the human ship's command center. The captain was a middle-aged human male with graying hair and weathered features. He wore a simple uniform with no elaborate decorations, standing calmly before what appeared to be a relatively small crew. "This is Captain Rogers of the United Earthship Phoenix," the human said, his voice steady despite the impossible odds he faced. "You have entered human space without authorization and threatened our worlds. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. Leave now, and no harm will come to you or your crews." Admiral Voss could barely contain his amusement. The human was either incredibly brave or completely insane. "Captain Rogers, I am Admiral Voss of the Vortec Third Fleet. You face 3,000 ships with one. Are your species incapable of understanding basic mathematics?" "We understand mathematics quite well, Admiral," Rogers replied calmly. "But you are making a fundamental error in your calculations." "And what error would that be?" Captain Rogers smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. "You assume you are facing just one ship. You are not. You are facing all of humanity." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Admiral Voss staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew exchanged glances of bewilderment and concern. The human captain's words made no sense from a tactical perspective, but there had been something in his tone that suggested he was not making an empty boast. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "the human vessel is moving toward our forward battle group. Speed is increasing steadily." Admiral Voss watched as the Phoenix began its approach, a single dot of light advancing against the vast formation of Vortec warships. The scene was almost poetic in its futility. One ship against 3,000, sailing toward certain destruction with the same determination that had carried humanity to the stars. "All ships, prepare for engagement," he ordered. "I want that vessel disabled, not destroyed. I want to interrogate the crew and learn what they thought they could accomplish." But as the Phoenix drew closer, Admiral Voss began to notice something strange. The human ship was not maneuvering like a conventional vessel. It was not attempting to use its speed or stealth to avoid engagement. Instead, it was flying directly toward the center of the Vortec formation as if it welcomed the coming battle. "Sir," the science officer said, his voice tight with confusion, "I am detecting unusual energy readings from the human vessel. The ship appears to be charging some kind of weapon system, but the energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases." Admiral Voss frowned. The humans were known for their innovative technology, but they had never demonstrated anything that could threaten a Vortec fleet. "What kind of weapon system?" "I cannot determine that, sir. The energy readings are completely outside our experience." The Phoenix continued its advance, now less than 50,000 kilometers from the first line of Vortec ships. At this distance, the human vessel should have been firing every weapon it possessed in a desperate attempt to inflict damage before its inevitable destruction. Instead, it maintained its steady course, silent and seemingly peaceful. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "the human vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through." Captain Rogers appeared on the screen once more, but this time he was not alone. The camera pulled back to reveal hundreds of humans working at stations throughout the ship's interior. They moved with purpose and coordination, their faces showing no fear despite the overwhelming odds they faced. "Admiral Voss," Rogers said, "I want you to understand something about my species. We are not warriors in the traditional sense. We do not seek conquest or glory. We do not fight because we enjoy violence or because we believe might makes right." The camera continued to pan across the ship's interior, showing level after level of humans working together. Engineers, scientists, technicians, and civilians, all working side by side with military personnel. It was not a warship's crew, but something else entirely. "We fight because we must," Rogers continued. "We fight because there are things worth fighting for. We fight because we believe that freedom and dignity are worth any sacrifice. And most importantly, we fight because we never give up." The transmission shifted to show the Phoenix's exterior, and Admiral Voss gasped in surprise. The ship's hull was beginning to glow with a soft blue-white light. The energy readings on his sensors were climbing rapidly, reaching levels that should have been impossible for a vessel of that size. "You see, Admiral," Rogers said, his image returning to the screen, "you made the same mistake that many others have made. You assumed that humanity would fight the way you fight. You assumed that we would meet force with force, ship with ship, weapon with weapon." The Phoenix was now glowing so brightly that it was visible to the naked eye across the vast distances of space. The Vortec fleet's sensors were screaming warnings about energy levels that defied conventional understanding. "But that is not how humans fight," Rogers continued. "When faced with an overwhelming enemy, we do not try to match their strength. We find another way. We adapt. We endure. We turn their own power against them." Admiral Voss felt a cold realization creeping through his consciousness. The human ship was not preparing to fight a conventional battle. It was preparing to do something else entirely, something that the Vortec military had never encountered before. "Sir," his tactical officer said, his voice barely above a whisper, "recommend we withdraw to a safe distance." But Admiral Voss knew. It was too late. The Phoenix was now less than 10,000 kilometers away, and the energy readings were off the scale. Whatever the humans had planned, it was about to begin. "All ships, open fire," he commanded. "Destroy that vessel now." The order went out across the fleet, and 3,000 ships began to charge their weapons. But as the first energy beams reached out toward the Phoenix, something impossible happened. The beams simply vanished, absorbed by the ship's glowing hull as if they had never existed. The Phoenix continued its advance, drinking in the massive barrage like a sponge absorbing water. And for the first time in his long military career, Admiral Voss began to understand what Captain Rogers had meant. When he said they were not facing just one ship, they were facing all of humanity, and humanity had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. The first wave of Vortec fire struck the Phoenix with the combined power of 100 suns. Energy beams, plasma bolts, and antimatter torpedoes converged on the human vessel in a display of destructive force that should have vaporized anything in its path. The space around the Phoenix erupted in brilliant flashes of light as the weapons found their target. When the glare faded, the Phoenix was still there, completely undamaged and glowing brighter than before. "What?" Admiral Voss stared at his tactical display in disbelief. "Status report." "Sir," his weapons officer replied, his voice shaking, "all weapons fire has been absorbed by the target. No damage detected. The human vessel appears to be converting the energy into some kind of internal power source." The Phoenix had not even slowed down. It continued its steady advance through the Vortec formation, passing between the massive warships like a ghost moving through a graveyard. The alien crews watched in stunned silence as their most powerful weapons had no effect whatsoever on the strange human vessel. "Sir," the science officer reported, "the human ship's energy output has increased by 300% since our attack began. It appears to be using our own weapons against us." Admiral Voss felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had built something that violated every principle of warfare he had ever learned. A ship that grew stronger when attacked, that fed on the very weapons meant to destroy it. It was impossible, yet it was happening right before his eyes. "All ships, concentrate fire on the human vessel," he commanded. "Maximum power." The order echoed across the fleet, and every Vortec ship began pouring their full firepower into the Phoenix. The space around the human vessel became a maelstrom of destructive energy, a storm of death that would have reduced an entire planet to cosmic dust. The Phoenix absorbed it all. Not only did the human ship remain undamaged, but its glow intensified until it was like a small star floating in the darkness of space. The energy readings on the Vortec sensors climbed to levels that their instruments could barely measure. Then, without warning, the Phoenix fired back. The weapon that emerged from the human vessel was unlike anything in the Vortec arsenal. It was not a beam or a projectile, but something else entirely. a focused stream of pure energy that cut through the void like a blade made of light itself. When it struck the first Vortic destroyer, the ship simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed. Not vaporized, but completely unmade on a molecular level. The Phoenix fired again and another destroyer vanished. Then another. Each shot was powered by the energy the Vortec fleet had thrown at the human ship, amplified and concentrated into a weapon of unimaginable power. How is this possible? Admiral Voss demanded, his voice rising in panic. How can they turn our own weapons against us? His science officer was frantically analyzing the readings, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Sir, the human vessel appears to be equipped with some kind of quantum energy conversion system. It is absorbing incoming energy, storing it in a containment field, and then releasing it in concentrated bursts. That is impossible. The energy requirements alone would require the power output of an entire star. Not if the energy is being provided by the attacking force, the science officer replied grimly. The more we shoot at them, the more powerful they become. Admiral Voss watched in horror as 6 more of his ships were destroyed by the Phoenix's return fire. The human vessel was moving through his fleet like a predator among prey, turning their own strength against them. Every shot they fired only made their enemy more dangerous. Sir, his tactical officer said, recommend we cease fire and withdraw to a safe distance. But Admiral Voss knew there was no safe distance. The Phoenix had absorbed the combined firepower of half his fleet, and that energy was now stored within its hull like a weapon waiting to be unleashed. The human ship could probably destroy every vessel in the Vordak Armada with the power they had inadvertently provided. All ships, cease fire, he commanded. Repeat, all ships cease fire immediately. The order went out across the fleet, and the massive bombardment stopped. The Phoenix continued to glow with absorbed energy, its hull pulsing with barely contained power. It had positioned itself at the center of the Vortok formation, surrounded by 3,000 ships that suddenly seemed very small and fragile. Sir, the communications officer reported, the human captain is requesting to speak with you. Admiral Voss nodded grimly. He had no choice but to listen to what the human had to say. Captain Rogers appeared on the screen, his calm expression unchanged despite the devastating display of power his ship had just demonstrated. Admiral, Rogers said, I hope you are beginning to understand the situation you have created. What are you? Voss asked. What have you built? We have built exactly what we said we would build, Rogers replied. A ship that represents all of humanity, not just our technology but our philosophy, our refusal to give up, our ability to adapt and overcome. The camera pulled back to show the Phoenix's interior once more, but now Admiral Voss could see what he had missed before. The thousands of humans working throughout the ship were not just crew members. They were representatives of every aspect of human civilization. Scientists, engineers, artists, farmers, teachers, and children all working together with a single purpose. You see, Admiral, Rogers continued, you made the same mistake that many others have made. You assumed that strength comes from size, from numbers, from the ability to destroy. But humanity learned long ago that true strength comes from the ability to endure, to adapt, and to turn adversity into advantage. The Phoenix fired once more, destroying another Vortic destroyer with casual ease. The message was clear. The human ship could continue this destruction indefinitely, powered by the very weapons meant to stop it. The Phoenix is not just a warship, Rogers explained. It is a statement. It is proof that no matter how overwhelming the odds, no matter how impossible the situation, humanity will find a way to survive and prevail. Admiral Voss looked at his tactical display and saw the truth of the human's words. He had brought 3,000 ships to crush one enemy vessel, and instead had provided that vessel with enough power to destroy his entire fleet. The humans had turned his greatest strength into his greatest weakness. What do you want? He asked. I want you to understand something that the galaxy seems to have forgotten, Rogers replied. Force is not the answer to every problem. Sometimes, the greatest victory comes not from destroying your enemy, but from teaching them that their path leads only to destruction. The Phoenix began to move again, gliding through the vortex formation with the same graceful motion it had displayed throughout the battle. But now every ship in the fleet gave it a wide berth, their crews understanding that they were in the presence of something beyond their comprehension. "You have a choice to make, Admiral," Rogers continued. "You can continue this attack and watch your fleet be destroyed by its own weapons, or you can choose a different path. The choice is yours." Admiral Voss looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all looking at him with the same expression of shock and fear. They had come here expecting an easy victory and instead had encountered something that challenged their most basic assumptions about warfare and power. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Voss was beginning to understand that there might be alternatives to conquest and domination. The humans had shown him a different way, a path that turned strength into weakness and weakness into strength. The question was whether he was wise enough to take it. The silence that followed Admiral Voss's ceasefire order lasted exactly 47 seconds. Then, from the outer ring of the vortex formation, came the sound that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives, the scream of a ship's hull being torn apart by forces beyond comprehension. Captain Rogers had not moved from his position at the center of the Phoenix's command deck, but his expression had changed. The calm confidence was still there, but now it was joined by something else: disappointment. "I had hoped you would choose differently, Admiral. I gave no order to resume firing." Voss shouted into his communications array. "Who authorized weapons fire?" The answer came from Commander Thek, leader of the fleet's most aggressive battle group. "Admiral, this is madness. One ship cannot be allowed to humiliate the entire Vortex Empire. I am moving my squadron to ram the human vessel." Before Admiral Voss could countermand the order, 12 Vortex heavy cruisers broke formation and accelerated toward the Phoenix. Their hulls glowed with the heat of overcharged engines as they approached ramming speed. The human ship waited motionless as if welcoming their approach. "You fools!" Voss screamed. "You are feeding it more energy." But Commander Thek was beyond reason. The sight of his empire's most powerful fleet being defied by a single human vessel had driven him to desperation. His ship struck the Phoenix's hull with the combined kinetic energy of 12 asteroids moving at significant fractions of light speed. The Phoenix absorbed the impact without even trembling. The energy from the collision was converted instantly into the ship's power matrix, causing the vessel to glow so brightly that it was visible from Earth's surface. Then, as the Vortex cruisers bounced off the Phoenix's hull like insects striking a windshield, the human ship's response was swift and terrible. Beams of concentrated energy lanced out from the Phoenix in 12 precise directions. Each beam found its target with surgical accuracy, and 12 of the Vortex Empire's finest warships simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed by explosion or fire, but completely disintegrated at the molecular level. The demonstration sent shockwaves through the remaining fleet. The Phoenix was not just absorbing their weapons and ramming attacks, it was converting them into power for weapons that exceeded anything in their collective experience. "All ships maintain distance," Admiral Voss commanded. "Do not approach the human vessel." But the damage was already done. The Phoenix now possessed enough stored energy to power a small star, and Captain Rogers was preparing to use it. The human ship began to move through the Vortex formation with deadly purpose, its hull pulsing with barely contained power. "Admiral," Rogers said, his voice cutting through the chaos on the Vortex communication channels, "your subordinate has made a choice for your entire fleet. I regret that it has come to this." The Phoenix fired its main weapon again, and a Vortex battleship vanished in a flash of light, then another. The human vessel was moving with increasing speed, its path taking it through the heart of the alien formation. Every few seconds, another ship would disappear, erased from existence by weapons powered by the Vortex's own attacks. "Admiral," Voss watched in horror as his carefully organized fleet dissolved into chaos. Ships were breaking formation, some trying to flee while others attempted desperate attacks on the human vessel. Nothing worked. The Phoenix absorbed every weapon strike, every ramming attempt, every desperate maneuver, and converted it all into fuel for its own destructive capabilities. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we have lost over 800 vessels. The human ship shows no signs of slowing down." The Phoenix was now moving at impossible speeds, its hull glowing like a miniature sun as it carved a path of destruction through the Vortok Armada. It was not firing at random. Each shot was precisely calculated to maximize the psychological impact on the remaining crews while demonstrating the futility of continued resistance. "How are they doing this?" Admiral Voss demanded. "How can one ship move so fast and maintain such firepower?" His science officer had been studying the Phoenix's energy patterns throughout the battle. "Sir, I believe I understand now. The human vessel is not just absorbing energy, it is using that energy to enhance every aspect of its performance. Speed, maneuverability, weapons, shields, everything is being boosted by the power we have provided. That is impossible. Ship can channel that much energy without destroying itself. A conventional ship, no. But the Phoenix appears to be built around the energy absorption system. The entire vessel is designed to handle massive power inputs and convert them into whatever capabilities are needed." Admiral Voss stared at his tactical display as another squadron of his ships was eliminated by the Phoenix's weapons. The human vessel was not just winning the battle, it was demonstrating that the battle itself was meaningless. Every attack only made it stronger. Every desperate maneuver only provided it with more power. "Sir," the communications officer said, "Commander Thak's remaining ships are requesting permission to retreat." "Granted," Voss replied immediately. "All ships fall back to maximum weapons range. Do not engage the human vessel under any circumstances." But even as he gave the order, Admiral Voss knew it was too late. The Phoenix had absorbed the energy from thousands of weapon strikes and dozens of ramming attempts. The human ship now possessed enough power to destroy every remaining vessel in the Vortak fleet, and Captain Rogers had shown no reluctance to use that power. The Phoenix came to a stop at the exact center of the Vortak formation, surrounded by the wreckage of nearly a third of the Empire's most powerful fleet. The ship's hull had dimmed slightly, but it still pulsed with enough contained energy to reduce planets to dust. "Admiral Voss," Captain Rogers said, his image appearing on screens throughout the Vortak fleet, "you now have a choice to make. You can order your remaining ships to continue their attacks, knowing that each strike will only make us stronger. Or you can choose to end this before more lives are lost." Admiral Voss looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all staring at him with the same expression of shock and defeat. The mighty Vortic Empire, which had conquered half the galaxy through superior firepower and military discipline, had been brought to its knees by a single human vessel. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to understand what you have witnessed." "Here today," Rogers replied. "You came to human space with 3,000 ships, believing that overwhelming force would guarantee your victory. Instead, you have learned that force without wisdom is meaningless. You have learned that the strongest weapon in the galaxy is the one that turns your enemy's strength against them." The Phoenix began to move again, slowly circling the Vortak formation like a predator evaluating its prey. Every ship in the fleet tracked its movement, their crews knowing that they were completely at the mercy of the human vessel. "You have also learned something else," Rogers continued. "You have learned that humanity will not be conquered. We will not submit to tyranny. We will not abandon our freedom or our dignity, no matter the cost." The Phoenix fired once more, destroying a Vortek cruiser that had attempted to target the human homeworld with its long-range weapons. The message was clear. Any threat to human worlds would be met with immediate and overwhelming response. "The battle is over, Admiral," Rogers said. "The question now is what you will do with the knowledge you have gained." Admiral Voss looked at his tactical display one final time. Of the 3,000 ships he had brought to conquer humanity, fewer than 2,000 remained. The Phoenix had destroyed over a third of his fleet using nothing but their own weapons turned against them. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Voss was beginning to understand that there might be alternatives to conquest and domination. The humans had shown him a different way, a path that turned strength into weakness and weakness into strength. The question was whether he was wise enough to take it. The surrender came not with fanfare or formal ceremonies, but with the simple act of 3,000 alien warships powering down their weapons simultaneously. The gesture rippled through the Vortek fleet like a wave, each ship's commander making the same decision that Admiral Voss had made moments before. The alternative was the complete destruction of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The Phoenix hung motionless in space, its hull still glowing with the absorbed energy of 1,000 weapon strikes. Around it, the remnants of the Vortek Armada waited in tense silence for Captain Rogers to speak. The human vessel could have destroyed them all with the power they had inadvertently provided, but instead it waited with the patience of a teacher allowing students to reach their own conclusions. "Admiral Voss," Rogers said, his voice carrying clearly across the communication channels, "you have made a wise choice. Your crews will be escorted to the nearest neutral port, where they will be given the opportunity to return to Vortek space unharmed." "Wait," Voss said, his voice heavy with confusion and defeat. "You are letting us go?" "Of course," Rogers replied. "We are not conquerors, Admiral. We are defenders. Our goal was never to destroy your fleet, but to protect our worlds and our people." The Vortek Admiral struggled to understand the human's words. In his experience, victory in battle led to subjugation of the defeated, seizure of territory, and the imposition of the victor's will. The concept of winning a battle and then allowing the enemy to leave unharmed was completely alien to him. "But we threatened your worlds," he said. "We came here to conquer your species." "Yes, you did," Rogers acknowledged. "And we stopped you. The threat is over. There is no need for further violence." The Phoenix began to move slowly through the Vortek formation, its crew scanning the alien vessels for damage and casualties. Where they found ships in distress, they offered assistance. Where they found wounded, they provided medical aid. The same vessel that had destroyed a third of their fleet was now helping the survivors recover from the battle. "I do not understand," Admiral Voss said. "Why are you helping us?" "Because that is what humans do," Rogers replied simply. "We fight when we must, but we do not hate our enemies. We defend our freedom, but we do not seek to deny freedom to others." The camera view shifted to show the interior of the Phoenix. Once more, and Admiral Voss could see the thousands of humans working throughout the ship. They were not celebrating their victory or demanding vengeance against their defeated enemies. Instead, they were coordinating rescue operations, providing medical assistance, and preparing to escort the Vortek fleet to safety. "You see, Admiral," Rogers continued, "you made a fundamental error in your understanding of humanity. You assume that because we are capable of great violence, we must be driven by the same desires for conquest and domination that motivate your empire. Are you not?" "No," Rogers said firmly. "We fight because we must, not because we want to. We build weapons because we need to defend ourselves, not because we enjoy destruction. We resist conquest because we value freedom, not because we seek to rule others." The transmission shifted to show the Phoenix's engineering sections, where thousands of humans were working to maintain the incredible systems that had made their victory possible. Admiral Voss could see that the ship was not just a weapon, but a complete representation of human civilization condensed into a single vessel. "The Phoenix was not built to conquer," Rogers explained. "It was built to endure. For 50 years, we studied every threat we encountered, every challenge we faced, every lesson we learned about survival in a hostile galaxy. We took all of that knowledge and built a ship that could turn any attack into strength." "But how?" Admiral Voss asked. "The energy requirements alone should be impossible." "Nothing is impossible if you approach the problem correctly," Rogers replied. "You see weapons as tools of destruction. We see them as sources of energy. You see armor as protection from damage. We see it as a way to absorb and store power. You see shields as barriers, we see them as collection systems. The Phoenix's hull pulsed gently as Rogers spoke, demonstrating the flow of energy through the ship's systems. The absorbed power from the Vortac attack was being channeled into every system aboard the vessel, enhancing its capabilities far beyond what should have been possible. The Phoenix does not fight the way you fight, Rogers continued. It does not try to match force with force or weapon with weapon. Instead, it accepts whatever force is applied to it and transforms that force into something useful. The harder you hit it, the stronger it becomes. Admiral Voss was beginning to understand the philosophical implications of what he was witnessing. The humans had not just built a superior weapon, they had built a superior way of thinking about conflict itself. They had taken the fundamental principle of warfare and turned it inside out. "This is why you only sent one ship," he said slowly. "Exactly," Rogers confirmed. "We did not need more ships because we were not trying to outfight you. We were trying to outthink you. We knew that any conventional fleet we could build would be smaller than yours, so we built something unconventional instead." The Phoenix began broadcasting on all frequencies, its message reaching every ship in the Vortac fleet simultaneously. The transmission showed scenes from Earth and the human colonies, cities full of peaceful citizens, children playing in parks, scientists working in laboratories, artists creating beautiful works of expression. "This is what we were defending," Rogers said. "Not territory or resources or strategic advantages, but a way of life. A civilization based on the belief that every person has the right to choose their own path, to pursue their own dreams, to live free from fear and oppression." Admiral Voss watched the images with growing amazement. The human worlds looked nothing like the military installations and fortress cities of the Vortic Empire. They were places where beings could live and grow and create, rather than simply exist to serve the state. "We built the Phoenix because we knew that someday someone would come to take all of this away from us," Rogers continued. "We knew that our small fleet could never protect us against the great military powers of the galaxy, so we found another way." "You found a way to make strength irrelevant," Admiral Voss said. "We found a way to turn strength against itself," Rogers corrected. "The Phoenix is powered by the aggression of its enemies. The more violent the attack, the more peaceful the response becomes possible. It is the ultimate expression of human philosophy, turning adversity into advantage." The Vortic admiral looked at his tactical display, where the Phoenix appeared as a single bright dot surrounded by the scattered remnants of his once mighty fleet. The human ship had not just defeated them, it had taught them something profound about the nature of power and the futility of using force to solve complex problems. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you have a choice," Rogers replied. "You can return to your empire and report that humanity cannot be conquered through force. You can tell your leaders that we possess weapons that grow stronger when attacked, defenses that become more powerful when challenged, and a philosophy that turns every defeat into a lesson." The Phoenix began to escort the Vortac fleet toward the edge of human space, its movements gentle but firm. The message was clear: the aliens were free to leave, but they were not welcome to stay. "Or," Rogers continued, "you can choose to learn from what you have experienced here. You can ask yourself whether a civilization that can build something like the Phoenix might have other things to teach. You can wonder whether the pursuit of conquest and domination is really the best way to ensure the survival and prosperity of your people." Admiral Voss considered the captain's words as his fleet limped away from the battlefield. The Vortic Empire had been built on the principle that strength was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. Today, they had encountered a strength that was different from anything they had ever imagined, a strength that grew from weakness, that fed on opposition, that became more powerful through the very act of being challenged. "Captain Rogers," he said finally, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." "If we had not attacked, if we had simply remained at the edge of your space and demanded surrender, what would you have done?" Rogers smiled for the first time since the battle began. "We would have invited you to dinner, Admiral. We would have shown you our worlds, our culture, our way of life. we would have tried to convince you that there are better ways to achieve security and prosperity than through conquest and domination. And if we had refused, then we would have respected your decision and asked you to leave. The Phoenix was built as a last resort, Admiral. We much prefer to resolve conflicts through conversation rather than demonstration. As the Vortak fleet reached the edge of human space, Admiral Voss found himself thinking about the implications of what he had witnessed. The humans had built the ultimate weapon, but they had used it only to defend themselves. They had achieved total victory, but they had shown mercy to their defeated enemies. They had demonstrated overwhelming power, but they had used that power to protect rather than to conquer. "Captain Rogers," he said as his flagship prepared to jump to hyperspace, "thank you." "For what, Admiral?" "For teaching us that there is more than one way to be strong." The Vortak fleet vanished into hyperspace, carrying with them a story that would change the galaxy forever. The Phoenix returned to its position between the alien departure point and Earth, its hull gradually dimming as the absorbed energy was channeled into the ship's systems. In the months that followed, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The story of the single human ship that had defeated 3,000 alien vessels became legend, but more important was the lesson it carried. Civilizations across the galaxy began to reconsider their assumptions about power, strength, and the nature of conflict itself. Some chose to ignore the lesson and continued their pursuits of conquest and domination. They learned, often to their regret, that humanity had built more than one Phoenix. Others chose to listen and learn. They discovered that the humans were as generous with their knowledge as they were fierce in defense of their freedom. They found that a species capable of building ultimate weapons was also capable of building ultimate solutions to the problems that plagued the galaxy. The Phoenix itself became a symbol of hope for the oppressed and a warning to the oppressors. It remained on patrol at the edge of human space, a reminder that some things were worth defending and that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and when it was not. And, in the depths of space, humanity continued their quiet work of building, learning, and growing. They had proven that they could not be conquered, but more importantly, they had proven that conquest itself was unnecessary. In a galaxy full of species seeking to impose their will on others, humanity had shown that the greatest victory was the one that turned enemies into friends and strength into wisdom. The question that echoed through the galaxy was no longer, "How many ships do the humans have?" but rather, "What can we learn from them?" And that, perhaps, was the most human victory of all.